What if Anakin didn't tell Mace Windu about Palpatine? What would happen then? Let's find out. So in this timeline, the deviation from the original timeline occurs upon Anakin leaving Palpatine's office, having learned that Palpatine is Sidious. We pick up with Anakin piloting his starfighter through the bustling skylines of Coruscant, having just left the Chancellor's office after the shocking revelation of the Chancellor's true identity as the Sith Lord Sidious. Anakin's mind raced, his thoughts a chaotic whirlwind of fear, anger, and confusion. The fear of losing Padme consumed him, overshadowing all else. It wasn't merely a concern for her well-being or a desire to prevent her suffering. Instead, it was a deep-seated, almost selfish dread of being left alone, of having the one person who truly understood him torn away. The thought of her absence left a gaping void in his heart, one that threatened to swallow him whole. As he navigated through the congested traffic of Coruscant skylanes, Anakin's movements became increasingly erratic. His usually precise piloting faltered as his focus wavered, consumed by the tempest of his emotions. The sleek starfighter slowed to a crawl, barely managing its position in the skyline. Around him, other speeders swerved and dodged, their pilots shouting obscenities and gesturing angrily at the Jedi Knight, who seemed oblivious to the chaos he was causing. "Move it, you carking fool," a Rhodian taxi driver bellowed, his green face contorted with rage as he narrowly avoided a collision with Anakin. A Twi'lek in a luxury speeder leaned out of her window, her eyes twitching in irritation. "Some of us have places to be, Laser Brain," she shouted. Their words barely registered in Anakin's consciousness as he grappled with the momentous decision before him. Time seemed to flow slow as he considered his options, the bustling city fading into a distant blur. If he were to alert the Jedi Council to Palpatine's true nature, they would undoubtedly move to arrest him immediately. The Chancellor, no, the Sith Lord, would be removed from power, possibly executed for his crimes. And with him would vanish any hope of learning the dark side techniques that could save Padme from the fate Anakin had foreseen. He could almost hear Master Yoda's voice in his mind, warning against attachment and fear. But those teachings seemed hollow now, in the face of potentially losing everything he held dear. Coruscant's sun, known as Coruscant Prime, was setting, casting long shadows across the city and bathing everything in a blood-red glow. It felt ominous, as if the very planet was reflecting the darkness of Anakin's thoughts. A gust of wind buffeted his starfighter, causing it to sway slightly, mirroring his own unsteadiness. As he hovered there, caught between duty and desire, Anakin made his choice. He would not reveal Palpatine's secret, at least not yet. He needed time to learn more, to understand the power the Sith Lord wielded. Only then would he be certain of saving Padme, of securing his own future joy. As Anakin's starfighter descended into the Jedi Temple's hangar bay, the familiar surroundings did little to quell the storm raging within him. The polished floor reflected the warm glow of the sunset. The air hummed with the quiet efficiency of maintenance droids and the distant echoes of footsteps. Upon landing, Anakin's eyes immediately locked onto a group of 4 Jedi Masters gathered near a shuttle. Mace Windu stood at the forefront, his stern expression a sharp contrast to the serene atmosphere of the temple. Beside him, Kit Fisto's tentacles swayed gently, while Agent Kolar and CC-10 stood in silent contemplation. As Anakin approached, Mace turned to face him, his voice carrying a mix of determination and urgency. "We received word from Mustafar. Obi-Wan has defeated General Grievous." A flicker of pride for his former master briefly pierced through Anakin's turmoil, but it was quickly overshadowed by the gravity of the situation at hand. Mace continued, gesturing to his companions. "We're heading to the Chancellor's office to ensure he relinquishes his emergency powers now that the threat has been neutralized." Anakin fell into step beside Mace as they walked towards the shuttle, his mind racing. Initially, Anakin considered remaining silent, allowing the Masters to proceed with their plan. As they neared the vessel, a surge of paranoia gripped him. What if Palpatine refused to give up his powers? What if the Sith Lord, whose immense power Anakin could sense, let his emotions overtake him and lashed out at the Jedi? Any conflict between Palpatine and the Order would jeopardize Anakin's desperate plans to save Padme. He could not risk it, Anakin's paranoid mind decided. So Anakin had to make sure that none of this happened. And to do that, Anakin's mind quickly came up with a plan. He figured that chances of conflict with Palpatine would significantly lessen if instead of the Jedi, it was senators, accompanied by their media personnel, asking Palpatine to give up his emergency powers. Palpatine was definitely not going to attack the Jedi with the entire galaxy watching, Anakin figures. And so, just as Mace was about to board the shuttle, Anakin's voice rang out, halting the Jedi Masters in their tracks. "Master, wait," Anakin said, his words tumbling out with barely contained urgency. "I have concerns about this approach." Mace turned, his eyebrows raised in a mix of surprise and curiosity. "Speak your mind, Skywalker," he said. Anakin took a moment to respond, organizing his thoughts. "I fear that 4 Jedi Masters alone demanding the Chancellor relinquish his powers would cause significant turmoil in the Senate. Many senators harbor resentments towards our order, and this action could be seen as an overreach." The other Masters exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of consideration and skepticism. Anakin pressed on, his voice growing more confident. "To maintain order and legitimacy, it might be wiser to involve some of our political allies in the Senate. The delegation of 2,000, for instance, senators like Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, or Senator Padme Amidala, they share our concerns about the Chancellor's power and could lend credibility to the request." Anakin paused, gauging the Master's reaction before continuing. "If you were to accompany these respected senators to the Chancellor's office, it would present a unified front, and if the situation escalates, then we can step in. And in that scenario, our involvement would be seen as supportive, rather than confrontational, as many in the Senate might see it." Silence fell over the group as they contemplated Anakin's words. The distant hum of the temple system seemed to grow louder in the absence of their conversation. After a short moment, it was Agent Kolar who spoke up, his deep voice resonating in the hangar. "General Skywalker raises valid points. We must consider the political ramifications of our actions, given the state of things in the Senate." Kit Fisto, standing beside Agent Kolar, nodded. "Indeed, we cannot risk giving our political opponents ammunition to use against us. A more diplomatic approach could prevent accusations of overstepping our bounds." Mace Windu's expression remained inscrutable as he weighed the arguments. But finally, Mace let out a resigned sigh. "Very well, Skywalker's strategy has merit. We will contact our allies in the Senate and coordinate our approach," he said. Relief washed over Anakin, though he was careful not to let it show on his face. As the Masters began discussing the logistics of their new plan, Anakin thought about the implications of what he had just done. Soon after their discussion in the hangar, Mace Windu contacted Senator Bail Organa. The Jedi Master's hologram flickered to life in Bail's office. "Senator Organa, we require your assistance in a matter of utmost importance," Mace began, outlining the situation and their proposed approach. Bail listened intently, his brow furrowing. "I understand, Master Windu. I'll confer with my colleagues immediately." Meanwhile, Anakin reached out to Padme. In this transmission, Anakin told Padme what was happening, about how Mace Windu and the other Masters are planning on confronting Palpatine with political support. Anakin asked Padme to ensure that media personnel are present when this happens, but most importantly, he also asked Padme to not be there when this happens. Padme asked him why, but Anakin couldn't give her a clear answer, because he couldn't reveal to her that Palpatine was Sidious. But in the end, Padme agreed, and the transmission ended. And right after her transmission with Anakin ended, Padme received a call from Bail Organa. And soon, Padme, along with Bail Organa, Mon Mothma, and their other trusted allies, convened via the HoloNet through an encrypted channel to discuss strategy. "We need to ensure transparency," Padme suggested, her voice firm. "We should take a small media team with us. It would allow us to show the galaxy exactly what we're requesting the Chancellor, preventing any speculation or misinterpretation." The idea was met with nods of approval from the holograms of the other senators. They discussed further, and in the end, the plan was as follows. Bail Organa, Mon Mothma, Padme, Ni Alawar, and some of their other allies, along with a small media team, would meet up with the Jedi in the Republic Executive Building, and then confront Palpatine in his office before the entire galaxy. And with all that decided, the transmission ended. And it was only now that Padme thought of what Anakin asked of her, to not go to this meeting with Palpatine. But Padme concluded that Anakin was just being paranoid about something he wasn't being honest about, and she decided that she couldn't stay away from this pivotal meeting. And so Padme left her apartment in the Senate District and made her way over to the Executive Building. And so, soon enough, they all met up in the Republic Executive Building. And then, the assembled delegation, which contained 4 Jedi Masters, the senators including Padme Amidala, Bail Organa, Mon Mothma, Gideon Danu, Fang Zar, and Ni Alvar, and a small media team from the Coruscant Newsnet, made their way towards Chancellor Palpatine's office. The corridors, usually alive with activity, seemed unnaturally subdued as they approached their destination. As they neared Chancellor Palpatine's office, Mon Mothma addressed the group one final time. "Remember, we are here to formally request relinquishment of emergency powers. Let's approach this diplomatically." The doors to Palpatine's office slid open. The Chancellor sat behind his imposing desk, bathed in the warm glow of Coruscant sunset. His expression shifted from surprise to a practiced smile as he took in the unexpected delegation. "My dear friends," Palpatine began, his voice smooth as silk. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this rather impressive gathering?" Mon Mothma stepped forward, the Jedi Masters positioning themselves behind the senators in a show of support. Her voice was calm but firm as she spoke. "Chancellor Palpatine, we've received confirmation that General Grievous has been defeated. The Clone Wars are effectively over." Palpatine's eyebrow rose, his smile widening. "Wonderful news indeed. The Republic goes a great debt to our brave soldiers and the Jedi Order. In light of this development," Mon Mothma continued, "we've come to formally request that you relinquish the emergency powers granted to you by the Senate." A fleeting expression crossed Palpatine's face, so brief that no one really caught it. Palpatine leaned back in his chair, his fingers stippled as he considered the delegation before him. Palpatine noticed the 2 holocam operators from the Coruscant Newsnet recording him, possibly broadcasting all this live. And he also figured that Anakin had not turned him over to the Jedi Council. The fading sunlight cast a warm glow across the office, highlighting the tension etched on the faces of the senators and the Jedi. After a long moment, Palpatine's lips curled into a benevolent smile. "My friends, you are absolutely right. The emergency powers were always meant to be temporary and necessary measure during these trying times. Now that peace is on the horizon, it is only fitting that we return to our democratic principles." A collective sigh of relief rippled through the group. Padme and Bail exchanged almost surprised glances, while Mace Windu's stern expression softened slightly. Palpatine rose from his seat, his movements slow and deliberate. He walked around his desk, arms spread in a gesture of openness. "But let us not be hasty. The transition back to normalcy must be handled with care and wisdom." The Chancellor's eyes swept across the room, meeting each gaze in turn. He then turned towards the holocams that were being pointed at him. "We stand at a crossroads, my friends. The choices we make now will echo through history. We must ensure that the peace we've fought so hard for takes root and flourishes." The holocam operators adjusted their equipment, capturing every word and gesture for the audience across the galaxy. Palpatine seemed to grow more animated, his voice taking on a passionate timbre. "The Republic has weathered a terrible storm, but we have emerged stronger, more united. Now it is time to build on that unity, to forge a future where such conflicts become unthinkable." As Palpatine spoke, his words were being broadcast across thousands of worlds. In countless homes, cantinas, and public squares, beings of all species gathered around holoprojectors, hanging notice every word. On Naboo, in a crowded plaza in Theed, a cheer went up as their former senator pledged to guide the Republic back to peace. On Corellia, factory workers nodded in approval, seeing hope for economic stability. Even on distant outer rim worlds like Tatooine, where cynicism towards the Republic ran deep, many found themselves grudgingly impressed by Palpatine's apparent willingness to relinquish power. Back in the Chancellor's office, Palpatine concluded his impromptu speech. "I will, of course, begin the process of transferring emergency powers back to the Senate immediately," he finished. As Palpatine concluded his speech, the Jedi Masters exchanged cautious glances, while the senators allowed themselves small smiles of victory. The holocam operators continued their diligent work, capturing every nuance of this historic moment. In the very next day, Chancellor Palpatine made good on his word. He had called an emergency session of the Senate. Thousands of pods filled the vast rotunda as senators from across the galaxy gathered for this emergency session. The air crackled with anticipation as Chancellor Palpatine's podium rose to the center of the chamber. "Honorable representatives of the Galactic Republic," Palpatine began, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Today marks a pivotal moment in our shared history. With the defeat of General Grievous and the impending end of the Clone Wars, I stand before you to formally relinquish the emergency powers granted to me at the beginning of this conflict." A wave of applause rippled through the Senate, and Palpatine raised his hands, calling for silence. "However, our work is not yet done. We must now secure a lasting peace with the separatist systems. This will require delicate negotiations and a steady hand to guide us through these turbulent times. I understand, my dear friends, that I have occupied the position of Chancellor longer than term limits allow, and I will gladly accept it if this body wishes to elect someone new to carry out this crucial task of peace negotiations." As Palpatine's speech concluded, senators began to call for the floor. One after another, they rose to speak, many of them echoing a similar sentiment, which went as follows. While the emergency powers must be rescinded, Palpatine's experience was crucial for the peace process. Senator Ask Ak of Malastare was particularly vocal. Chancellor Palpatine has led us through the darkest days of this conflict. Who better to lead us into the light of peace, he asked. And many showed support to this statement, something that did not surprise Palpatine. The session stretched on for hours as more senators voiced their support. Even those who had been critical of Palpatine's expanded powers found themselves swayed by the argument for stability and experienced leadership during the transition. As the debate wound down, Mustafar called for a vote. The motion before the Senate is twofold. First, to formally accept Chancellor Palpatine's relinquishment of emergency powers, and second, to request that he maintain in office as Chancellor until peace treaties with the separatist systems are finalized. We will now vote, Ameta finished. The chamber fell silent as senators input their decisions. Minutes trickled by, feeling like hours to those watching across the galaxy. Finally, Masameta's voice boomed through the rotunda once more. By an overwhelming majority, the Senate has voted to accept the relinquishment of emergency powers and to retain Chancellor Palpatine in office until the completion of peace treaties with the separatist systems. So this was a result that did not surprise Palpatine in the least. Thunderous applause erupted throughout the chamber. A humble smile appeared on Palpatine's face as he accepted the Senate's decision with a gracious bow. "My dear friends," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I am deeply honored by your trust. Together, we will forge a peace that will last for generations to come." So with that decided, the Senate session continued, because there were many matters beyond this to discuss. But as all this was happening, in a secluded viewing platform, Anakin Skywalker watched the proceedings with an unreadable expression. His plan had worked. The tension between the Jedi and Palpatine had eased. The war was nearing its end, and Anakin could seek Palpatine's counsel once more. However, the knowledge that Palpatine had orchestrated a conflict that had claimed millions of lives gnawed at his conscience. He tried to push these thoughts aside, focusing instead on his primary concern, which was ensuring that Padme remained alive and well. As the Senate session stretched on, Anakin's agitation grew. He shifted relentlessly in his seat, his eyes darting between the senators and the chronometer on the wall. He had to speak with Palpatine as soon as possible, and because of that, each passing minute on the chronometer felt like an eternity to Anakin. Suddenly, Anakin's comlink chirped. He glanced down to see an urgent transmission from Ahsoka. Ahsoka was back from Mandalore, Anakin realized. He answered the comlink and Ahsoka said that they had to meet immediately, but Anakin tried to delay it. It was only when she mentioned Darth Sidious and danger that Anakin's focus sharpened. And so, Anakin asked her if she could meet him in the Senate building, and Ahsoka agreed. And soon enough, the two met in a quiet corridor. Ahsoka's face was etched with concern as she relayed what Maul had told her on Mandalore about how Sidious had been manipulating Anakin to become his apprentice. Anakin's lack of surprise upon receiving this news didn't go unnoticed by Ahsoka. His face remained impassive, almost resigned. This oddity raised alarms in Ahsoka's mind. Maul is a Sith, Ahsoka. He's lying, trying to cause infighting, probably. Anakin said flatly, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. Ahsoka will talk later, in more detail. Don't worry about Maul. There is no one trying to manipulate me. Alright? Don't worry, Anakin said. And then, before Ahsoka could say anything else, Anakin left, assuring her that they will talk soon. As Anakin resumed his vigil over the proceedings, Ahsoka made her way to the Jedi Temple. Her mind raced with questions and concerns about her former master's behavior. It was certainly odd. At the temple, Ahsoka found herself in a meeting with Masters Yoda, Mace Windu, and Obi-Wan Kenobi, who by this point had returned from Utapau. They asked her about Maul and any information she might have gleaned about Sidious. Mace then spoke of their plans to interrogate Maul thoroughly, and Ahsoka realized the Masters would likely uncover Maul's claims about Anakin anyway, and that it was better if it came from her instead of Maul. After a moment of hesitation, she decided to share what Maul had said about Sidious manipulating Anakin. And after she was finished explaining everything to the Masters exchanged troubled glances. Who could have been manipulating Anakin for so long? Obi-Wan mused, stroking his beard. Mace's brow furrowed as he considered the question. The only person outside the Order who's shown a consistent interest in Anakin has been Chancellor Palpatine. It's been so ever since Anakin arrived on Coruscant. This observation sparked a tense discussion among the Masters and Ahsoka. They pondered the possibility that Palpatine might be under the influence of Sidious, recalling Count Dooku's claim years ago that the Republic was under Sidious's control. If true this is, Yoda said gravely, trust Skywalker to report on the Chancellor's dealings, we cannot. A close eye on him we must keep, Yoda finished. So what should we do, Master? Ahsoka asked Yoda. And Yoda looked away, deep in contemplation. A little later, in the Senate building, Anakin received another transmission, this time from Mace Windu, requesting his immediate return to the temple. Frustration appeared on his face, but he complied, arriving shortly at a meeting with Mace, Yoda, and Obi-Wan. Anakin's eyes scanned the room, noting Ahsoka's absence. The atmosphere was tense, the silence broken only by the distant hum of Coruscant's never-ending traffic outside the temple walls. As the meeting commenced in one of the Jedi Temple's smaller council chambers, the last rays of Coruscant's sun painted the room in warm hues. The city planet's endless skyline stretched out beyond the windows, a tapestry of lights gradually illuminating as the night fell. Mace Windu's deep voice resonated in the chamber. With the war's end in sight, our primary objective now is to apprehend the Separatist leadership. Their capture will effectively dismantle what remains of their movement. Anakin, who had been fidgeting subtly throughout the meeting, suddenly perked up. "Do we know their whereabouts?" he asked, a hint of eagerness in his tone. Obi-Wan stepped forward, his robes rustling subtly as he moved. "We've made a breakthrough on that front, Anakin," he said. "We managed to salvage the memory units of one of General Grievous's Magna Guards. The audio and video data we recovered includes Grievous informing the Separatist Council that he was sending them to the Mustafar system for their safety." Anakin's eyes widened slightly at this information. Obi-Wan continued, "Clone forces under Master Fisto are already on their way to Mustafar to verify if the leaders are indeed there." Mace then turned his gaze to Anakin. "In light of recent concerns, Skywalker, we need you to be extra vigilant regarding Chancellor Palpatine's dealings. Report any suspicious activity immediately." Anakin nodded, his face an impassive mask. "Of course, Master Windu," he said. Anakin for a second noticed how Master Yoda was remaining suspiciously silent, but he quickly dismissed it. The meeting proceeded with a discussion about splinter Separatist groups in the Outer Rim. Anakin seemed distracted, his gaze often drifting to the windows, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. As the meeting finally drew to a close, Master Yoda finally spoke, his gravelly voice filled with cautious optimism. "Hope for peace we soon will have, but vigilant we must remain. Keep our eyes open, we should." With that, the meeting dispersed, and Anakin, before leaving, made his way over to Obi-Wan, speaking in hushed tones. "I'll keep an eye on the Chancellor as requested, Master," he said, already making his way towards the door. "But I should get back to the Senate building now." "Anakin, are you alright? You seem distracted." Anakin forced a smile. "I'm fine, Master. Just eager to see this conflict truly end." Before Obi-Wan could press further, Anakin was gone, his footsteps echoing down the corridor as he hastened away. Obi-Wan watched him go, a mix of concern and suspicion clouding his features. That night, after the long Senate session ended, Anakin made his way to Palpatine's office, his office in the Senate building. The grand corridors of the Senate building were quiet, the usual hustle and bustle of the day replaced by a calm stillness. The polished floors reflected the ambient lights, creating an almost surreal atmosphere as Anakin walked. The walls, adorned with tapestries and portraits of past chancellors, seemed to watch Anakin as he moved purposefully towards his destination. Soon enough, Anakin approached the large, ornate doors to Palpatine's office. The guard stationed outside nodded in recognition and stepped aside to let him pass. As the door slid open, he was greeted by the sight of Chancellor Palpatine's expansive office, dimly lit and bathed in a soft, warm glow from the various lamps strategically placed around the room. Anakin stepped in, the doors closing silently behind him. As Anakin entered Palpatine's office, he noticed Mas Amedda and Sly Moore engaged in a hushed conversation with the Chancellor. Upon seeing Anakin, Palpatine's demeanor shifted, his attention immediately focusing on the young Jedi. "Ah, Anakin," Palpatine said, his voice carrying a hint of pleasant surprise. He turned to his aides. "Leave us," he said. Mas Amedda and Sly Moore exchanged a brief glance before nodding respectfully. They gathered their datapads and exited the office, the door sliding shut behind them with a soft hiss. Anakin took a seat in front of Palpatine's desk, his posture tense, eyes fixed on the Chancellor. Before Palpatine could speak, Anakin's words cut through the silence of the room. "Tell me how to say Padme," he said, his voice low and urgent. A smile spread across Palpatine's face, his eyes glinting in the dim light of the office. Anakin leaned forward, his gaze intensifying. "Plagueis was your master, wasn't he?" Surprise flickered across Palpatine's face, quickly replaced by a hint of intrigue. Anakin, noticing this subtle shift, pressed on. "I've had time to think as I watched your show in the Senate today. It's obvious that Darth Plagueis was your master." Palpatine's smile widened as he nodded slowly. "You are indeed perceptive, Anakin. I've always admired your intelligence. Is what you said about Plagueis true?" Palpatine took a moment to respond, but then said the following. "I've witnessed Plagueis kill and revive a being called Venomous once," Palpatine began, his voice taking on a more reverent tone. "Everything I told you about Plagueis is true, Anakin. His mastery over life and death was extraordinary. What about his apprentice killing him in his sleep? Is that true?" Anakin asked, his eyes never leaving Palpatine's face. Palpatine's expression darkened for a moment, a mix of emotions flashing across his features. "Yes, Anakin, even that. It was Plagueis who named me Sidious, and he was my master. And once Plagueis became a threat to me, I had to eliminate him. This is the way of the Sith, Anakin." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Anakin leaned forward, his eyes intense with desperate hope. "So, if you killed him, you must have learned everything from Plagueis. Does that mean you know how to keep one from dying?" Palpatine again turned to face Anakin. "Yes, my boy," he said softly, the lie slipping easily from his lips. In truth, Palpatine had killed Plagueis before learning this particular technique, but Anakin couldn't know that, because Palpatine still wanted to manipulate Anakin to the dark side, even here. And if Padme were to die, Palpatine could simply convince Anakin that through the dark side, even those that have been dead and buried can be brought back. Which, side note, as evidenced by the Vader comics, is possible. Anyways, back to the story. Relief washed over Anakin's features, his shoulders visibly relaxing. "Then, if Padme's life is in danger, you can save her." His voice trembled slightly with barely contained emotion. As Anakin awaited his response, Palpatine thought about how this development might affect his carefully laid plans to turn the young Jedi to the dark side. However, Palpatine realized that even if Anakin somehow resisted the pull to the dark side, all was not lost. In the worst-case scenario, Palpatine decided he could simply take Anakin prisoner and keep him in stasis until Palpatine rediscovered the ancient Sith technique of essence transfer, following which Palpatine could transfer his soul into Anakin's body. With this contingency in mind, Palpatine spoke again. "Yes, Anakin, I can save her," he reassured, his voice rich with false benevolence. Anakin closed his eyes briefly, exhaling a shaky breath. He then discussed some more, but soon enough Anakin was gone, fully believing that if something were to happen, Palpatine can save Padme. As Anakin left the office, his steps lighter with newfound hope, Palpatine leaned back into his chair. Palpatine's mind whirred with possibilities, each thought a carefully placed piece in his grand design. There was no need to rush, he mused. Order 66, the final nail in the Jedi's coffin, could wait. After all, he was still Chancellor, his position reaffirmed by the very Senate he planned to dissolve. And the so-called peace negotiations with the Separatists were nothing more than a charade. He could prolong these negotiations for as long as he wanted, and thereby holding on to his position of Chancellor as long as he wanted. Palpatine sat there for a long while, going over the many factors that were now at play. Most of the Republic's clone forces were now being brought back to Coruscant, ostensibly to maintain order in these turbulent times. But in reality, there were pieces on a strategic board, positioned perfectly for the endgame. And the Jedi, those self-righteous guardians of a dying order, were all now flying back into their temple, all gathered in one place, making their destruction easier, Palpatine thought. Palpatine again smiled. Everything was still proceeding per his meticulous plan. A few hours later, by the time it was almost midnight, Palpatine prepared to leave his office in the Senate building and head over to his personal residence, which was located in the Republic Executive Building. But suddenly, as he stood, he stiffened, because through the Force he sensed several Jedi approaching, an unusual occurrence at this late of an hour. Their presence radiated determination and readiness for conflict, as Palpatine could sense. Had Anakin betrayed him? No, he would have sensed that, Palpatine thought. As he pondered the possibilities, two loud thuds echoed from outside his office door, as if bodies had slammed against the opposite wall. The door then slid open, revealing Mace Windu, Yoda, Shakti, Agent Kolar, Ki-Adi-Mundi, and Saesee-Tiin. Palpatine attempted a welcoming smile. "Masters, to what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" In response, 6 lightsabers ignited simultaneously. Yoda's gravelly voice cut through the tension. "We know, Sidious." That's all he said. Palpatine's facade crumbled instantly. With inhuman speed, he produced a lightsaber from his sleeve, its crimson blade humming to life. Palpatine then assessed his predicament. Fighting 6 masters was not something he was sure he could manage. On the other hand, he now had an excuse to execute Order 66. All he needed to do was get out of his office. So within seconds, Palpatine decided that his best course of action would be to try and escape. And so in that very instant, Palpatine sent out a very powerful force push, pushing the Masters away from the exit. And with that, Palpatine leapt, His goal, the exit. But right as he was at the end of the hallway to the exit, just when he thought he was out, he was pulled back in with the Force by Master Yoda, back into the battle. And it quickly became clear that Palpatine was not getting out of there without a fight. The office erupted into chaos. Lightsabers clashed in a dizzying display of light and sound. Palpatine moved with incredible speed, his red blade a blur as he fended off multiple opponents at once. Mace Windu pressed forward, his purple saber arcing through the air. Palpatine parried the strike and retaliated with a flurry of blows that drove Windu back. Yoda leapt into the fray, his small form rolling through the air like a green tornado. At this point, Palpatine tried another route of escape by leaving his office and making his way into the Senate Rotunda. But the Jedi followed, and the fight spilled out of the office and into the Senate chamber. Palpatine bounded from one hovering platform to another, the Jedi in hot pursuit. Lightsabers clashed mid-air as they leapt between platforms, the vast chamber echoing with the sounds of their combat. Ki-Adi-Mundi attempted to flank Palpatine, but the Sith Lord sensed the attack. He spun, deflecting Mundi's strike, while simultaneously force-pushing Shakti off her platform. Shakti managed to grab onto the ledge, dangling precariously over the chasm below. CC-Teen rushed to aid his fellow Jedi, but Palpatine was ready. With a cruel laugh, he unleashed a barrage of Force lightning, catching Teen in mid-leap. The Jedi Master convulsed in agony before plummeting into the depths of the chamber. The remaining Jedi redoubled their efforts. Agent Kohler and Mace Windu coordinated their attacks, their lightsabers a whirlwind of purple and blue. Palpatine matched them blow for blow, his face contorted in a rictus of hate and exhilaration. Yoda, sensing an opening, launched himself at Palpatine's unprotected back. The Sith Lord sensed the attack at the last moment and ducked, causing Yoda to collide with Windu and Agent Kohler. All three Jedi tumbled off the platform, with Yoda and Windu barely managing to land on the platform below, and Agent Kohler only managing to land on a platform even below that. Taking advantage of this, Palpatine unleashed another torrent of Force lightning, this time at Ki-Adi-Mundi. Ki-Adi raised his saber to block, but the sheer power of the attack drove him to his knees. Ki-Adi gritted his teeth and pushed back against the onslaught. With a surge of effort, he deflected the crackling energy, sending it ricocheting off nearby platforms. The smell of ozone filled the air as course marks appeared on the polar surfaces. Shakti, by this point having regained her footing, leapt back into the fray. Her blue lightsaber twirled in a defensive pattern as she advanced on Palpatine. The Sith Lord spun to face her, his movements so fast they seemed to blur. The blades met in a flurry of strikes, each trying to find an opening in the other's defense. Mace Windu and Yoda, having recovered from their fall, bounded up through the levels of platforms. Windu's face was set in grim determination, his purple blade humming with deadly intent. Yoda's small form belied his incredible speed and agility as he flipped and twisted through the air, his green lightsaber flashing towards Palpatine. So at this point, Palpatine was fighting off Ki-Adi-Mundi and Shakti, with Mace Windu and Yoda approaching him. And Agent Kohler, seeing his fellow Jedi rejoin the battle, pressed forward with renewed vigor. She soon joined them. The chamber was a dizzying spectacle of light and motion. Lightsabers clashed and spun, their glowing blades leaving trails of light in the air. The Jedi and the Sith Lord leapt from platform to platform, their movements so fast that they seemed to defy gravity itself. Palpatine snarled, his face contorted with rage, and while he knew that he was at a disadvantage, he reveled in the challenge, in finally being able to unleash his full power after years of hiding. With a burst of Force energy, he sent Ki-Adi-Mundi flying backwards, the Jedi Master's body slamming into a wall with a sickening crunch. Mace Windu seized the moment, lunging forward with a powerful strike. Palpatine parried, their blades locked together, faces inches apart. "You cannot win, Jedi," Palpatine hissed, his yellow eyes burning with hatred. Windu didn't reply, instead pushing harder, forcing Palpatine back a step. Yoda then joined the attack, his green blade a blur as he attacked from a below platform. Because of this, Palpatine was forced to disengage from Windu to defend against Yoda's onslaught. The battle continued to rage, neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. Palpatine's power seemed limitless, and two Jedi were already out of the fight. But the remaining Jedi fought with the desperation of those who knew the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. Agent Kohler, observing the fight, began to formulate a plan. He realized that to defeat Palpatine, one more of them might need to make the ultimate sacrifice. As he observed the Sith Lord's movements, a look of determination settled over him. Kohler then began to intentionally leave openings in his defenses, hoping to bait Palpatine into a fatal mistake. And the Sith Lord, consumed by his battle lust, didn't notice the subtle change in Kohler's fighting style. The opportunity came during a particularly fierce exchange. Palpatine, seeing what he thought was a weakness in Kohler's guard, lunged forward with the killing strike. Kohler, anticipating this, allowed the red blade to pierce his chest. As the pain exploded through his body, Kohler summoned his remaining strength for one final act. With Palpatine's guard lowered, believing he had struck a killing blow, Kohler thrust his own lightsaber forward, The blade was aimed at Palpatine's heart, but at the last moment Palpatine managed to deflect it. But Kolar still did damage, because his blade, even though it didn't go through Palpatine's heart, did manage to go through his gut. The Sith Lord's eyes widened in shock and disbelief, and using this distraction, Yoda, Mace Windu, and Shakti pushed forward. And within a few moments, Palpatine felt their blades go through his arms, legs, and then finally his neck. And soon enough, Palpatine landed on the Senate floor, literally in pieces. The Sith Lord was dead. The remaining Jedi stood in stunned silence, the sudden quiet deafening after the chaos of the battle. Mace Windu, Yoda, and Shakti gathered at the edge of a platform, looking down to where Kolar and Palpatine had fallen. "It's over," Mace Windu said softly, deactivating his lightsaber, his voice echoing in the vast space. So, how did all this happen? How did the Jedi know that Palpatine was Sidious? Well, to explain that, let's go back a bit. So earlier, after Ahsoka had told the Masters what she had learned from Maul, they discussed what they should do next. They knew by now that Anakin might be compromised. "If there's any truth to this, we must act quickly, but cautiously," Obi-Wan said. Mace Windu nodded. "We need to monitor Skywalker." "I don't trust him," Mace said. Yoda's ears twitched as he pondered the situation, and Ahsoka did not object. Having seen Anakin's reaction to what she had to say, she too feared that Anakin might be at risk. It wouldn't be the first time. So after a brief discussion, the three Masters and Ahsoka formulated a plan. They would summon Anakin for an urgent meeting under the pretense of discussing new intelligence about the Separatist leadership, their location on Mustafar. And during this meeting, they would secretly plant a listening device on him. And this is why, as Anakin was observing the Senate session, Mace Windu called him back to the temple. And after Anakin arrived and Obi-Wan began briefing Anakin on having located the Separatist leaders, Master Yoda discreetly put their plan into action. Using the Force with incredible precision, which wasn't difficult for Yoda, the Grand Master levitated a minuscule monitoring device towards Anakin's lightsaber. This sophisticated listening device had the disadvantage of a short range, but the massive advantage of being very small and undetectable unless someone used specialized equipment. And as for the short range, well, the Jedi Temple and the Senate building weren't too far from each other, so that wouldn't be a problem. The device contained a cutting-edge subspace transceiver, capable of transmitting encrypted data bursts at regular intervals. This method of communication made it virtually undetectable by standard scanning equipment, and power was supplied to this device by a microscopic hyperbaric power cell, drawing energy from the ambient light and heat around it, ensuring it could function indefinitely without needing some form of recharge. And so, with imperceptible movements, Yoda guided the bug to the side of Anakin's lightsaber hilt. The device's molecular adhesive activated upon contact, securing it firmly in place. The entire process took mere seconds and went completely unnoticed by Anakin. And as soon as it was attached to the lightsaber, its adaptive camouflage activated. Its surface shifted to match the lightsaber's metallic sheen and texture perfectly. Even if Anakin were to closely inspect his weapon, the device would be indistinguishable from the saber's surface. And after this meeting, as stated earlier, Anakin left back to the Senate, but unknown to him, he was being spied upon. So for several hours, the Jedi heard nothing of consequence. But then, as the Senate session ended, they picked up a conversation between Anakin and Palpatine in the Chancellor's senatorial office. Through the bug, they heard Palpatine's confession of being Darth Sidious, the Sith Lord they've been searching for. And they finally realized that Palpatine was not being controlled by the Sith, but rather he was the Sith. And Yoda realized that Anakin's visions of someone suffering was of Padme. So suffice to say, this was surprising. Palpatine being Sidious, that is. Anakin and Padme's relationship was an open secret, pretty much. So the revelation galvanized the Jedi into immediate action. They briefly debated what they should do. Obi-Wan tried to argue that maybe they should try and bring Palpatine to justice, so that he may stand trial. But Mace Windu argued that Palpatine has control over the Senate and the courts, and that he is too dangerous to be left alive. And Yoda too seemed to agree. And so, without delay, Mace Windu, Yoda, Shakti, Agent Kolar, Ki-Adi-Mundi, who had returned by this point, and Saesee Tiin made their way to the Senate building. And a short while after Anakin left, they arrived and managed to deal with Sidious. So what would happen after this? So very soon, the news that Palpatine was dead would spread, and the Jedi Council would announce to the holonet what they did and why they had to do it. And as evidence of their actions, they would present the findings of General Skywalker. They would tell the Republic that Anakin was working for them and that he managed to discover that Palpatine was in fact a Sith Lord named Sidious, and as evidence, they would play the recording from the bug that was placed on Anakin's lightsaber. This of course wouldn't convince many people because most didn't know who Sidious was, but that would change because as all this was happening, Master Kit Fisto managed to come back to Coruscant with the Separatist leaders, and fairly quickly they will all testify that along with Grievous and Dooku, the one that led them was a Sith named Sidious. And as evidence, the Separatist leaders, mainly Newt Gunray, produced recordings of holographic communications with Sidious. And soon enough, even though there was a brief turmoil, pretty soon strong evidence would be presented to the Senate that Palpatine was indeed the Sidious. And along with the Separatist leaders, Maul is also on Coruscant as prisoner, by the way. So he too, after some convincing by the Jedi, would testify that Palpatine was Sidious and that he was his master. So even though many would still hold on to the belief that Palpatine was a good man, most would come to believe that based on the evidence, Palpatine was not as benevolent as he seemed. Following this, a new chancellor would be elected and democracy would be restored. And the war is still over, so peace negotiations with the Separatists would soon resume. And these agreements in the end would be drafted in favor of the Republic mostly. But anyways, what would happen to Anakin? Well, Anakin would only find out through the holonet that Palpatine is dead. And he would be even more surprised when his conversation with Sidious was played across the holonet. Now this would have happened because of Obi-Wan convincing Yoda and Mace Windu that Anakin was simply misled, and that on top of that, Anakin was viewed as the hero of the Republic, and that if he too were to back them up, that would give more credence to their argument against Palpatine, and would help lessen the tensions, both in the Senate and the Republic as a whole. And so that is why they went with the story that Anakin was on their side. And soon enough, Obi-Wan went to meet with Anakin. He was in the temple, so the only other place he could have been was at Padme's apartment. Anakin wasn't as mysterious as he thought, and so Obi-Wan would soon speak with an agitated Anakin in Padme's apartment in the Senate district. They wouldn't of course enter into a duel, but Anakin would only calm down when Obi-Wan finally tells him that if there is a way to save Padme through the Force, then that information would be contained in the hidden archives in the Jedi Temple, and that he, Obi-Wan, promises to help him, and that he would have helped him earlier had Anakin told him what was going on. And Padme too would back up Obi-Wan after learning who Palpatine really was. And so after a few hours of talking, Anakin would calm down, and he too would soon stand before the Senate and tell them that he was a spy working for the Order to discover Palpatine's true nature. And because of the indirect service Anakin had done towards the downfall of the Sith, Obi-Wan, with the help of Jocasta Nu, did manage to grant Anakin access into the hidden archives. So side note, Jocasta Nu could grant Jedi Knights access into the hidden archives. This is evidenced by the Vader comics. And so Anakin would soon begin his research, along with Obi-Wan, focusing on the healing arts of the Jedi Order. But none of that would soon matter, as pretty soon, Padme went into labor, and Luke and Leia were born, without Padme dying. Because like the sun says in the Clone Wars, the future can be changed. And it was changed, because Anakin managed to change the path he was on. But it is only after Luke and Leia were born that Anakin was met with a different reality. He had, in a way, betrayed the Jedi Order, and almost sided with the Sith. And Anakin knew that he couldn't really stay in the Order now, because many of the Masters knew what he did. And in Anakin's mind, the Masters that died when they went after Palpatine, those deaths may have been prevented had he told Master Windu that Palpatine was Sidious as soon as he found out. And because of this belief, Anakin soon left the Order, following which he and Padme moved to Naboo, at least temporarily. So what do you think would happen after that? Would Anakin be somehow called back to the Order? What would happen? Anyways, thank you to CJ Russell, Lord Newt, Rufus Nelson IV, Rashid, Aaron, ZQuickC1, Daniel Bell, and Yesmar Vinicius for supporting me on Patreon. And also thank you to Michael Sampson for becoming a channel member. And if you too want to support the channel, check out my Patreon. Link should be in the description where for $1 or more, you can support the channel for a month. Anyways, goodbye. Have a good day.